Following on from our series of interviews with business leaders in insurance, I am delighted to introduce Karen Graves, Head of European Operations at SCOR, a generalist insurance executive. Karen is a recognised inclusion thought leader. She was included on the list of 2018 Insurance Business Women of Influence and is also the chair of the Independent Women in Insurance Group. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
We've talked a little bit about the changing nature of work, the workforce. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think, well, for me, certainly, one of the things I've noticed in my industry in the last sort of nearly 30 years is the level of professionalism and the amount of younger people that my industry seems to be attracting these days in terms of the level of professionalism, the kind of roles that we're offering, the kind of skills that we need are far different than they were when I first started working in the reinsurance London market back in the 80s. And I think that's been a very good move, certainly in terms of the talent that we have coming into the market, because that's something that we've always had trouble to attract. But because we've got to be more professional, we have risk modelling, we need actuaries, accountants, so the whole skill set has become more professional, and I think we are now becoming a market of choice for a lot of young people, either leaving school or coming from university, which I think is one of the biggest changes that I've seen in terms of the mix of people. Our workforce and our colleagues, we're peppered with talent right across the board, and I think we need to think about, in this changing environment, how we use them, and use them differently with all the new skills and the new technology that we have. I think we need to think about what our workplace looks like and how we engage with the talent that we have and how we then integrate new talent.
We're in the midst of an industrial revolution. We've talked a little bit about this, the digital industrial revolution, and obviously the impact that's having on the insurance sector. And I think you're absolutely right. It almost seems that's, with the discussion around digital, we end up talking about young talent embracing the digital industrial revolution. But actually, with the multi-generations that are now in the workplace together, there's a huge amount that people with extensive experience can bring to that revolution, that revolutionary process, that digitization of the insurance industry.
I think one of the things we hear a lot about these days is insurtech and the kind of way that can disrupt our sort of structured and the framework that we currently operate in, which I view as a good thing, and a new way of looking at our business and bringing in new technology. The flip side of that, I think, is sometimes when you see these innovation labs almost, or these technology areas for development, they can be siloed within just, say, an underwriting division or in an IT bit. And actually, I think all of us have something to contribute to this based on a wealth of experience. And, very often ideas about coverage are not new, but the way that you can do something now, you may not have been able to do 20 years ago. And so when you're trying to create a new product, or you're trying to look at a new line of underwriting to provide a product for, having some grey hairs in the room, for want of a better phrase, and we can skirt around all of these stuff in a minute, but having some people with experience in the room can easily say, well, we looked at that 15 years ago, this is our problem, if you can solve this now, then we've got this kind of dynamic going on. And I think those kind of project-led insurtech innovation and experience sort of pools would be a great way to go. And I'm not sure that I see that. Maybe it's happening, I just haven't seen it. I think we think about these things, but we tend to silo them.
Sure.
So I think we need to use our experienced colleagues differently.
You touched on sort of diversity and inclusion in what you said, and I think there in the insurance industry there seems to be a real focus, certainly on gender diversity at the moment. There's certainly, but a lot of the other areas of diversity, perhaps the discussion, the conversation isn't happening as readily or as prominently. And I think you mentioned age specifically there, but that's a very interesting point that you made earlier to me about the connection that we all have with this.
Okay, so I'm very proud to be chair of the Independent Women Insurance Network, and we do focus on gender as a conversation. But what we try and do is it from an inclusive basis, where the things that we do, the forums we put on, the kind of information and training and the speed mentoring events that we do are there for everybody to attend. We don't exclude anybody, and I think the inclusion aspect, you need the support of all your colleagues to do this. And so we try and approach this from a good conversation basis, and also take the time at each event you run to just showcase maybe or talk about the impact that women are having in a particular sector, but from a positive and constructive way, not from an exclusion standpoint about, there's lots of dynamics in this, and we're not going to go into the gender pay gap area at the minute, but inclusion is a much better way. And I've had colleagues, I've been in this market for nearly 30 years, and I value all of my colleagues, male or female. The impact of age in our workforce is actually huge. It's the one thing, it's one of a few things, I guess, but for me, it's the thing that unites us all. We're all going down a career path together. They might be different career paths, but we're all getting older together. But the age thing is really important, and we've got to find a way of managing, I think, 5 generations in the workplace now. And
for the first time.
And that's a really interesting thing to think about. And I guess I started thinking about it because I was asked to do a talk at the CII about age from a sort of the older end of the spectrum, and how it made me feel and what I was expecting from my career going forward. We don't suddenly stop being ambitious because we hit 50. And we just want to perhaps contribute in a different way, I think. And so we need to take the experience and talents and the mentoring abilities and the general technical knowledge of older people within your workspace, and then help them influence and guide and listen to the young leaders, the future leaders that are coming in, because you need to bridge these two together. And I think we can get caught up in kind of sort of stereotypes about young millennials being a bit snowflakey, being a bit entitled, knowing what they want, and then older people being seen as being out of touch, slightly grumpy, not interested in what the younger generation are doing. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I do think we need to bring people together a bit more.
And there are stereotypes, absolutely.
There are absolute stereotypes.
But I think, there's a huge amount of, without wanting to sound in any way patronising, there's a huge amount of benefits to having people of experience in a business that is a traditional business that is moving into a new digital age.
I think that brings with it some certain responsibilities. I feel that personally. So wanting to be part of this workforce going forward, because I still have ambition and I still have things I want to do, I see it as important that I kind of, not to be kind of like a bit dad dancey about this, but I think it's quite important to understand technology, be able to use it, be part of it, without being too embarrassing, I hope, to family and my son, that you get to understand how you can use this kind of stuff, technology, to your benefit. And I want to work in some of the way that I think millennials want to work. I think you need structure and framework, but I think the style of working, there is a different way that I want to work going forwards, and I can see, and I'm very envious when I watch young people, the way they use technology, and I think I want to use it differently to make my life easier, to give myself more time to pursue the passions that I like.
So do you think...
So this industrial revolution that we're in, that workplace, full-time employment, full-time job, full-time retirement has completely gone. That's so not there anymore. We're in a different space. And I think the way that we work these days is in very much a framework that was designed for the last industrial revolution. Factories and shift work and people being around. And I accept that some industries, and mine included, need to have underwriters around, they need to have brokers, we need to have a framework where we are open for business. But around that, with all of our support services and our and the input that we get from risk managers, to consultants, sort of operational view, we don't have to work in that way. We just need to make sure that we provide them with the tools to be the engine room for our businesses, and we can work differently. And I would love that. To work differently. And
I think you mentioned millennials, which is a term that I don't think either of us particularly like, actually.
No, I'm quite uncomfortable with it, and I think it comes with a whole load of baggage attached to it, which is a lot of it's unfair.
Absolutely. we've talked about the gig economy,
Yep.
a portfolio lifestyle or portfolio working life, which I think actually appeals to most people, the opportunity to use their experience in different ways on a daily basis. With that comes, I think, a need for our approach to learning and development to be slightly different. It tends to be focused very much either, obviously, once, after education, an early part of one's career is where that learning and development, the focus really takes place. And with this change, what I believe, and I think we're on the same page here, is that that learning and development needs to continue.
But I work in a very traditional industry that is being forced to change by processes, really, first of all, in terms of how we accept business and how accessible that we are to clients. So that's a good thing. There is a lot of great drivers around gender and levelling out any gender pay issues, looking at how we might tackle those. There's been a massive support for LGBT inclusion, which is just fantastic, because I love this diverse workforce is wonderful. But what I don't think we do as an industry is then work out what success looks like for us. So we've had all these great drivers, and we know the issues and we know the things we need to solve. But I think we need to have some hard measurables now about what we see for our industry and our companies, about what success looks like in this multi-generational workspace. Absolutely. Where people want different things, and that brings a whole range of interesting things to manage as managers. And I think we've talked before about people at the top of a company get why change needs to take place, and inclusion is great. Young people coming in almost come in without a lot of the baggage that we had back a few years ago. And it's that middle sort of management level that is pushed for time, needs to get things done. We work in a very tight environment when it comes to expenses, generally speaking, these days. So things are very focused, and that luxury of time to really think about these things is quite limited. Sure. But it can have a big impact on your business.
Absolutely. I think
succession planning and future leaders and identifying.
It's clear that a diverse workforce is a successful workforce. So there's been many studies. McKinsey have written two very interesting papers, Delivering Through Diversity and Why Diversity Matters. And they show a very clear correlation between diverse workforce and company performance. And there's no escaping that. Unfortunately, I think middle management, because they're pressed for time and they have a lot of work to get through, that actually what tends to happen is you unconscious bias creeps into that recruitment process, because which is underpinned by in-groups and out-groups, and you are less empathetic to out-groups than in-groups, and you tend to hire what you've seen work in the past.
Because that's totally understandable.
Absolutely.
Because it requires a lot of joined up effort to bring some real change through, so that you have good succession planning, and that we start to see senior management of companies look different. Whether from a gender perspective or from a colour perspective, to look different.
Sure. And to think differently.
When we have conversations about innovation, they need to include everybody, because it's not just this one product-based thing. It's lots of things that could be talked about around insurtech, let's say, as a phrase. So I think that's something that we don't think about, I think, at the moment.
And look, things are changing, which is great, and the conversation that we're having is part of that, and the conversations that I know you've had with many, many people, and I've certainly had with many business leaders as well, about how to enact that change and how to do it in a way that is transitional and not necessarily revolutionary, because I think that can leave people behind.
Yes, and I think that's a very interesting point about being left behind. I think today, I hope that people appointed on merit, this meritocracy is driving change, I think, as well, in terms of looking at that. And businesses need different things. And I think you may find, senior age does not guarantee seniority anymore. So we need to work out how to live with that. As an older person, you can see potentially young people whizzing by you, and you're standing still because they're being appointed and promoted because their skill sets are different. But we have a bundle of talent that I guess is maybe a bit self-interested, but there's a bundle of talent that shouldn't be left behind.
Absolutely, it's a lot
so they need to upskill them, get them to think differently or contribute differently.
Just touching again on InsurTech, there's been a huge amount of investment taken place over the last few years. I think, stats I read, $130 million investment in 2011. By the end of 2016, that's grown to over 2.6 billion. And by now, 2018, I'm sure that number has probably doubled again. But it's interesting. We think that InsurTech or FinTech in general is a young person's game.
Yeah, I was at a talk the other day when we were asked, the audience was asked, what do we think the average age was for a startup, for a FinTech or an InsurTech company? And the average age is sort of mid-40s. And I think that's another interesting dynamic, isn't it, about that stereotypes that we mentioned before, that actually there are people there that are driving businesses, and they need the talents and skills of the younger workforce coming in, because whether they're coders or whatever they might be with their different skill sets that they're interested in, but actually you then still need a blend of people to make that business successful. And there was a stat from Barclays Business Banking, which I'd just like to share if I can, from in August 2017. They said the fastest growing age group of UK business owners in the last 10 years has been the over 65s. And I think that's people that are getting to a point where they've had a successful career, they find they perhaps don't fit in, but they want some control around what they do next. And so, the older, there's a phrase they use, olderpreneurs, but I hate made up words, but I'll have to go with it. They are going to be potentially your employees of the future.
Absolutely.
So we need to have that blend, I think, between the starting out in business and then using the experience of people at the other end of the scale.
The over 50s will make up, I think, a third of the workforce by 2020, which is fast upon us. Karen, I've really enjoyed talking with you today.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we're both slightly evangelical about this subject, which is great to hear. And I know that these conversations will continue. Thank you for joining us at Inventum Search today, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.